We open. In the wake of his conquest, the reign of the Lich Lord Mannimarco did not bring peace, but more terrible and horrific wars, and his growing empire was a blasphemy of dark magic and undeath, and it had drawn the hatred of all the living. And to the north, a gathering of the Nords, and to the east, a gathering of the Orcs. They would all combine and affect their forces in an attempt to push back against the undeath as he was expanding his order of the Black Worm. The Orcs to the east would raid and plunder, and the Lords to the north would war for Dragonstar. A normal person would be afraid from an onslaught, but Mannimarco was a man of great valor. And he will be in the war room in his chamber, communicating with his generals. My undying lord, coalitions are numerous and their troops are of high quality, and the Orcs fight with a ferocity we have not seen. The advisors suggest we hire mercenaries to bolster our lines. The Sons of Steels are available. Ha! Mercenaries? Never. Why would I spend my hard-earned ducats on sellswords who can flee, when I can simply summon what an army cannot? I fear not death, and I can just summon hordes, and even though they are weak, they do not need food, water, and they do not feel fear. And we will swarm them like we always have, and they will drown in the ocean of the dead. And this war will be put to the sword quickly. Yes, my lord. And this was Mannimarco's grand strategy. He would use his massive hordes as a wall to keep his enemies from unifying their forces. And he would crash his endless legions and bleed their resources dry and drain their lives in this grand bloody game of chess. And forever teeter and leverage the enormous amount of prisoners that he would gain, building his wealth and replenishing his magicka all at once. But enough of the focus on Mannimarco. Let us turn on to another part of his glorious order. We now move on to his family and his daughter, Aerin Len, a young elf, high elf of stunningly beauty, who was the very mirror of his father. She was a phenom, a phenomenal mage who had possessed her father's ambition and his sadistic cruelty. She was the spitting image of him in every way, and she loved him for it, with an obsessive, all-consuming adoration that she would keep hidden beneath a mask of perfect daughterly respect. And so, my lord, the temple holdings is a net drain on our resources. We don't know what to do with it. And Aerin would convene and also offer support to Mannimarco in his council as a valued member. Then give it away, she would say, and find another loyal fool. Create a new vassal and grant it to them. Let it be their problem. We can use this for more valuable, a city or a castle, and turn this into a proper investment. And Mannimarco would be very proud of his daughter. She would be an enormous help on his campaigns on the war front and in the administrative works that occur in the back. Do as she says. But even in his own court, the war was present, and it would demand a price. And the constant summoning of these legions would drain the Lich Lord's resources and put him into the dark deepness of the reserves. And he would always use his reliable resources in the dungeons. And he would go and look at a goblin one day, and who would be a Republican vassal type. And he would cower before Mannimarco, pleading for his life. Please, please, my lord, I cannot afford the ransom. You fool. You should know me well enough that there will be only two ways out of this. Gold or your life. And since you cannot afford your way out, your inability to pay is not my concern. And I'm afraid that I am in need of your soul. And of course, Mannimarco would quickly perform the rites and consume the goblin's soul to fuel his war machine. And weeks would turn into months, and days would turn into weeks. And Mannimarco's horde would do exactly as he had predicted. And they would not be winning glorious victories. Oh no, he would not need to do that. The sheer numbers was a constant enough threat and a very valuable presence on the battlefield that would prevent the Northern Lord's armies from combining, preventing them from uniting for a decisive blow. It was like his army was a wall of bone, and the second phase of his plan was beginning to bear fruit. And a scout would report to Mannimarco's tent. My lord! The enemy is becoming unsupplied. Their supply lines are being stretched thin and their forces are starving. Let them starve more, and let them sit in their camps and watch my legions, knowing they cannot advance nor retreat, and their forts will not be able to withstand my numbers for long, and we will squish them utterly. They fear the inevitable end. And Mannimarco was right. In his arrogance, he knew what his enemies had. They were living. They could not survive a battle without food. And a war would not be won by the ones who fight the hardest, but those who can afford to wait patiently. And for an immortal, time was one resource he would never run out of. The war of attrition would soon reach its final phase. And Lord Mannimarco's strategy would pay off, of course, and his horde would not need to break through the enemy forces, but bleed them dry and starve them of their supplies. And with this in the freezing lands of the north, they were trapped to the King of Worms' tactics. And he would close his fist around their necks. And in a desperate attempt by the enemy forces to find supplies, the Nords would split their forces. And of course, the aggressive vanguards would push ahead too fast, leaving their allies far behind. And it was a mistake like this that Mannimarco was dreaming of. They have separated the fools, and now I will strike. Send the signal and we will strike the vanguard. And the battles ongoing would be nothing but a pure slaughter. And Mannimarco's legions, no longer on the defensive, would swarm the isolated contingent and wipe them out before they could even sound the retreat. And then he would turn his full attention on the remaining army. He would have caught a big chunk of their forces, and as the rest fled, their panicked leader would make another foolish choice, leading his retreating army back into the path of the main horde, and the victory would be absolute. And Mannimarco would look over At the last enemy batter, the ground would be littered with dead, and he would feel nothing but the cold satisfaction of his plan perfectly executed. And with his enemies crushed, a profound sense of destiny would settle over the Lich Lord, and he had outthought and outlasted and overwhelmed every foe to him, and he had proven his superiority. But yet his title was that of a duchy tier, and it was insufficient, and it tied down his expansion. And he was no longer a man of lesser station. No, he had found a greater calling for his order. I will not be limited by the burdens of dukedom. No, I answer to no one, and I will be a king. And so with the gold he had secured from this defensive war, he would do what is necessary, and he would create his power base. In a grand ceremony, Mannimarco would build his kingdom. And the kingdom he would build would be held in a grand ceremony, and he would gather all his vassals, all his courtiers, all his acolytes to stand before him. By the might and the will and the strength of my legions, I will declare the formation of the kingdom of Dragontail, and I will be its king. And in this moment of supreme liberation, he would no longer be just a lord. He would be a rightful king who had forged his kingdom from the bones of his enemies as his own weapons. And this ascension would bring with it new benefits. His aura had intensified, his knights would be more effective, and the iron fist of his tyranny would be felt with an even greater weight than what it was before. And as his subjects knelt, his daughter, Arilyn, would watch from the side. There would be pride in her eyes, yes, but also a flicker of something else. A possessive gleam. It was the look like of one not just admiring the crown, but measuring it for herself. But of course, the ways of managing the realm would be having as he holds his first court. And one vassal would come forward and pleading about the ways of the raiders from the north. Even though the war had ended, they had still taken advantage of threats. But of course, Mannimarco would dismiss such things. Do not bother me with such trivialities. Handle it. And the second petitioner that would approach him would be one that would ask for the lordship of Dragonfields, and this would be the mighty warrior lady of Hammerfell, seeing an opportunity to establish herself. She would wish for that cityship and become the mayor to guard the north from the raiders in a positive attempt at mending the issue itself. You wish to form a city, then? Very well. You shall have your lordship, especially for your valor on the field commanding my armies. And I shall have a new city, especially since you will be the one funding it. And eventually his gaze would fall upon the banner of his new kingdom. It would not do. It was a very simple, plastic design, and it lacked the personal, terrifying aesthetic of the worm. This banner is pathetic. It needs to be remade in the more form of a worm. And the dragon must be red in the background, a deeper black. And as he would customize his crest, his daughter would step forward with the silky whisper. The dragon is strong, father, but a worm that devours the dragon. That would be a more accurate symbol of your power, would it not? A symbol of how you consumed the old world. And Mannimarco would look at his daughter and see the same ruthless ambition reflected in her eyes and would feel great pride. An excellent suggestion, my daughter. We will see to it. And he would resume his courtly duties with absolute power and authority. He would amass much gold from the ransoms of the war. And Mannimarco would only take on even greater characters into his lichdom and into his organization. If there were warriors that did not have magical aptitude, they would not be quelled worthy. If they were a great marshal, he would make them a thrall. Mannimarco was a king, and by being a king, every piece on the board would serve his purpose. And he would stand and sit again on his throne, looking over his domain and measuring his court. It was a new plateau of might, and his gaze would further turn once away from the north and from Hammerfell, but back to the heartlands to consolidate his power and expand his cult. King Mannimarco, now the master of his own kingdom, would spend his following time in the cold, doing calculations. And as his empire was breathing new life, fueled by the spoils of war and death that he inspired, his days would be filled with tedious but necessary task of rule, managing his vassals, educating his dynasty, and forever planning his next move on Tamriel. He would be an emperor in waiting, and every decision would be like a step towards his ultimate ambition. And his title as king was not the final destination, but merely another stepping stone for the work that lay ahead. And in these small times, he would spend tutoring his young grandson, Vorian, who was learning stewardship at a table laden with ledgers and abacuses. And this would be Mannimarco's grandson, still showing the faint scars from the uncontrolled Thume incident. He will be a silent and weary observer. Vorian, the Atada family tree will have deep roots. It will span centuries where mortal dynasties have risen and crumbled to dust. But a tree needs more than roots, it needs careful tending. You will learn the value of lands, of taxes, and of control. An army is a weapon, a powerful one. But a well-managed treasury is in the hand that wields it. And never forget that. Do you understand? Yes, Grandshire. Good. Competence is the only virtue I recognize. And I expect it from everyone. Even in the small failings among his other who share his blood, he would still work to build his dynasty so at least those that would be competent would thrive. He could no longer physically expand through his own expense and would have to rely on educating his heirs and the heirs that they would create. And he saw potential in his grandson for a competence that his own son would lack. And he would review his networks and study his enclave of spies, and noting with dismissive satisfaction that those that he would previously had compromised would no longer be necessary assets, and the hooks that he had before would now be irrelevant to his current ambitions. But these regional manipulations would matter not for Mannimarco, and his gaze would be fixed on the heart of the continent. And to get there, he would need to deal with a patchwork of lesser kingdoms that stood in his way, and seize the sites of power that would fuel his own ascension. In the lands to the southeast were a chaotic mess of petty lords and broken alliances, and there were many counties to be had into the southeast. "My lord Mannimarco," says his spy master, "an attack on the lords to the south will be complicated. Dysfunction they are, yes, but they do have many ties, and our actions would be seen as a direct threat to the sanctity of Sancrator, and will draw us into a war with their sworn keepers. Sancrator, the sacred city, the resting place of Riemann, and the holy site of immense power. You say this as if it is a deterrent. It is an invitation to me." This was the opportunity Mannimarco had waited for, and his goal was not just to conquer land, but to conquer various holy sites for the Order of the Black Worm, and desecrate these sacred places and bleed them of their power. And this would be a victory far sweeter and more meaningful than any simple conquest, and it was a step towards his own godhood. Why would I waste my time taking the lesser holdings when the true prize is here, ready for grasp? If I am to be at war with the guardians of the Sancrator, then I might as well make it my prize. We do not need to rush into the lesser conflicts when my ultimate goal is within reach. It is time. We will take Sancrator. And Mannimarco would launch his war, and his ambition, though blasphemous, would provoke a response in equal measure. And in defense of one of the most sacred sites in all of Cyrodiil, a holy order of immense power, an organization thought to be little more than a legend by some, was to be called to war against him, and it would be the Knights of the Eight. Mannimarco would quickly declare war on all opposing smaller forces to take everything all at once. And this would not be a simple war, and the king's declaration would draw him into multiple different stages, and it would be a grand chaotic melee against multiple armies, and a holy order whose knights would be the stuff of legends, and the danger was immense, and this threat would cause any king to tremble. But Mannimarco in his arrogance was unmoved, and by skillfully declaring war on all the sacred parties individually, he would prevent them from all uniting against them all at the same time, and will be able to deal with each force one by one. And the wars would rage for days, and the battles would be long and weary, and Mannimarco's forces would be locked in a grind, and the holy knights would be like everything the legends claimed, because each one worth nearly 50 of Mannimarco's skeletons, and their blessed weapons would turn his undead to dust, and he needed the siege of Sancrator and the lands to go by as fast as possible before the enemy's desperate armies would unite and crush him. Mannimarco would be forced to take command of his forces, and from atop of a hill and atop of many high-tier structures, he would wait for his moments. And it came when his siege engines, after days of relentless bombardment, would create a breach into the walls. And then there would be moments where there wouldn't be walls formed. And Mannimarco would stand on the front line under some cities. He would take a deep, rattling breath and focus his will and remember the uncontrollable rage that nearly killed his family. And smiles he had learned from his rage. The shout, this unstable gift from the meddling prince. I've nearly killed my family with it. I've learned its nature, chaos and rage, and once mastered it is a powerful weapon, and it will make the world so much less capricious. And as he unleashed his doom, it would not be a wild, uncontrolled blast, but a focused, directive wave. An untuned sonic force honed by his will, and the shout would slam against walls, and the stone would explode inward into a shower of consecrated dust, and form a gaping hole in an impassable maw, and the defenders on the walls would be obliterated, and a gateway would open for his forces, and he would quickly take the lands of the disparate lords that stood in his way of Sanquator. And Mannimarco would repeat this offense, and he would show that he had gained more control over it with each individual siege, and he had taken the beast within and turned it into an instrument of his will. And he would use his forces that were led by his Justicars and pour into the many gateways and wipe out the city's defenders. He would turn his power of his unrelenting force on the reinforcing mercenary army and decimate them. And the battle would be won in Sanquator. The heart of his enemies would fall. Mannimarco would conquer a holy site and lead a feat that would send shockwaves across Tamriel. And he would no longer just be a king. He would stand in the desecrated halls and turn his gaze towards further east, towards the ultimate prize, the white gold tower, and the game would be far from over. And he would fight this war and the next, and his ambition would be boundless, and his methods would be brutal. And the King of Worms would carve out his empire in Tamriel, and this growing power would not go unnoticed. For every victory and every soul he harvested, it would send ripples across the fabrics of existence, and would travel far beyond the shores to the mainland of Alinor. And we would find ourselves in the land of Artaeum once again, the Sigic Order, watching as Mannimarco stands in the halls of Sanquator. He grows too strong, and the balance is threatened. The monster we exiled has now become a king. A king can be unmade. And I think it is time we remind our student that there are powers far older and less forgiving